Hello, I'm John McBride. Thank you for joining me for this talk about the flow of art and culture from the Asian continent through the Korean peninsula into Japan. With this focus, we will explore major periods of Japanese history, including these epochs: the prehistoric migration from Korea, the introduction of Buddhism via Baekje, Korea, the Pottery Wars fueled by Japan's desire for Korean ceramics, Japan's enduring, long-lived peaceful diplomacy with Korea through the 17th and 18th centuries, the colonization period, and post-war artistic links. First, Japan's prehistoric era, the Jomon period. Approximately 14,000 BCE to 3000 BCE. Japan was populated with Jomon hunter-gatherers. Jomon was an extremely long-lived, peaceful, and caring culture. The period gets its name from magnificent rope-patterned pots fired in open kilns, a technology developed indigenously and unlikely from Korea. Jomon means rope pattern. Modern and contemporary Japanese artists have been influenced by this period, in particular Okamoto Taro, who famously exclaimed, "What on earth?" when he saw the Jomon pots and referenced them in his Tower of the Sun, the entranceway to Osaka Expo 1970, and his Myth of Tomorrow, painted in Mexico and now located at Shibuya Station, a Guernica-like warning for the nuclear age. Contemporary artists too, Okazaki Ryunosuke's Jomon series continues this visual tradition with his works now in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Fine examples of Jomon pottery are on display at the Kyushu National Museum. This museum was the fourth national museum to be built with the purpose of describing the flow of continental culture into Japan. Gradually, beginning 2,600 years ago, Jomon culture was supplanted by Yayoi culture. Yayoi peoples from the Korean peninsula brought with them wet rice growing technology and transformed Japanese society. Most of the immigrants came from the Korean peninsula and they were racially different to the Jomon. Today's Japanese are about 90% Yayoi DNA and 10% Jomon. The Ainu in the north of Japan and Okinawans in the south retain more similarities to each other and the Jomon peoples than they do to Japanese and Koreans today. Yayoi pottery, simpler than Jomon pots, was baked in closed kilns imported from Korea, producing thinner, harder wares. Patterns reflected nature, and these simple nature patterns were continuing motifs seen in Baekje metalwork. Baekje in the southwest of Korea was Japan's major source of iron and metallurgy. Nature-based Yayoi pattern influences continue to be reflected in contemporary art. Kusama Yayoi's polka dots symbolize interconnectedness with nature. Team Lab's immersive digital installations, now such a major Tokyo, Middle East and Kyoto attraction, explore human-nature relations reflecting ancient Japanese Yayoi philosophical concerns. And Noah Kohei's three-dimensional digital animal models, this one owned by the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, echo Yayoi traditions. And Noah's recent exhibition in Seoul strengthens contemporary Korea-Japan artistic links. The Kofun or tomb period 300 to 538 CE followed. Wealth from rice production created an elite class that built impressive keyhole-shaped tombs, such as the restored Kamezuka tumuli in northern Kyushu. 160,000 of these tombs are distributed throughout Japan. Japanese elites were buried with grave goods instantly recognizable in Korea: bronze mirrors, swords, and curved jewels. These three treasures of Korea became prized in Japan and eventually formed the imperial regalia of Japan. Haniwa clay figures surrounded tombs rather than being interred inside, a distinctive Japanese practice. However, there are haniwa-like cylindrical potteries in Korea associated with keyhole-shaped tombs, indicating cultural exchange during the tumulus period. Haniwa and funerary items called sue-ware were fired at high temperatures in anagama climbing kilns, imported from Korea. The wood ash that swirled about in the long climbing kiln during a wood firing combined with the feldspar in the clay and vitrified, producing this natural glaze effect. In following periods, sue-ware would be used as elite aristocratic tableware. Gold crowns were crafted in Korea's Shilla kingdom at this time, a golden age of ancient Korean civilization, and exemplified at the Seoul National Museum. And copied in Japan, such as at the Sanmaizuka tumulus in Ibaraki, just north of Tokyo. These magnificent works were crafted in the capital of the ancient kingdom of Shilla, Gyeongju, which in the 5th century was the 4th largest city in the world. Today, the entire city is a living museum and worthwhile to visit. The Kofun period ended with the introduction of Buddhism from Korea, beginning the Asuka period, 538 to 710 CE. Asuka marks Japan's first historical period, with profound social and artistic transformation through Buddhism. Buddhism had travelled a millennium from India, passing through China and Korea, each leaving distinctive marks. Korea was responsible for introducing Mahayana Buddhism to Japan with the inclusion of bodhisattvas, a Chinese and Korean invention, to make the religion more palatable to pragmatic Chinese, Korean, and Japanese merchants. Esoteric Shingon Buddhism entered Japan directly from China in 804 CE. Japan's first capital, Asuka, located in the south of the Yamato Plain, the plain where today's Kyoto, Osaka, and Nara are located, became a hub for Korean immigrants. With 1/3 of aristocrats of recent peninsular origin by 700 CE. The Aya clan, originally from Bakje, exemplifies this influence. Gangoji Temple was Japan's first Buddhist temple, with the King of Korea instrumental in its construction. Originally called Asuka Temple, it was moved from Asuka to Nara in 710 CE and renamed. The tiles on the roof were made by Korean tile doctors. They are rounded, the first of their kind, and this rounded style is still used today. Miraculously, a large section of these 6th century roof tiles survive today. They are the beautifully sort of mottled tiles we see here. Prince Shotoku, a major patron of Buddhism, built Horyuji Temple in 607 CE. It burned down but was replaced in 670 CE, which is the structure that survives today, the world's oldest wooden building. The Guze Kannon at Horyuji Temple demonstrates early Korean sculptural influence, praised by Ernest Fenollosa as the greatest monument of Korean art. Prince Shotoku also gifted a Maitreya Buddha made in Korea to Koryuji Temple in Kyoto, the first temple erected in Kyoto, established in 603 CE. Koryuji was built by the Hata clan, a large Korean clan of 30,000 people who populated the Kyoto basin and were expert weavers. Prince Shotoku's gift was slightly larger than its magnificent twin on the left here, which is a national treasure of Korea in the National Museum in Seoul. This pensive bodhisattva in the National Museum of Korea in Seoul reflects Gandhara's Greek-influenced sculptural style, flowing via Korea to Japan. The bodhisattva has an archaic smile deriving from the cult of Athena, introduced by Alexander the Great into Gandhara. As I mentioned, the bodhisattva are an addition to Mahayana Buddhism. They are Buddhas who, of their own volition, stay behind in paradise to assist others to achieve Buddhahood. And this was a much more attractive existence to pragmatic Korean and Japanese merchants who did not find the idea of donating to a religion to achieve a state of nirvana or nothingness particularly attractive. Greek influence persisted subtly in Japan. Japanese syncretic Shinto and Buddhist deities Fujin and Raijin, gods of wind and thunder, are based on Athenian statues of Boreas. They are still popular motifs. This fine work is by Ogata Korin, who was a Rinpa school artist. The school was started in the 17th century by Hongami Koetsu and by Tawaraya Sotatsu, upon whose work Korin based this painting. Hongami Koetsu founded an artistic community of craftspeople around Mount Takagamine in the northeast of Kyoto in 1615, after he was gifted the land by the first Edo shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. Some of these artisans had Korean backgrounds and are celebrated today in the Koetsu Kai, annual gathering of these important artists at Koetsu Temple on Takagamine Peak in Kyoto. As the Asuka period closed, Shilla and Tang forces defeated Baekje and their ally, the Japanese forces, compelling Japan to withdraw from Korean affairs. Japan's diplomatic administration moved from Hakata to Dazaifu, a strategic inland hub in Kyushu, protected by Korean-style fortifications. This begins the next historic period, the Nara period, 710 to 794 CE, which saw Japan establish its first permanent capital with heavy Korean immigrant presence in Nara. Estimates suggest a very large percentage of Nara's population had Baekje ancestry, a genetic link still evident today. Some historians estimate even 80% of the Nara population was from Korea. In Kyushu, the fall of Baekje, Japan's ally in southwest Korea, forced the Japanese to retreat from Hakata port. They established a new seat of imperial power inland at the better protected Dazaifu, which became the frontier of diplomacy, trade and defense with Korea and China from the 7th to 12th centuries. A moat and wall were built to protect the city, while Korean-style mountain castles rose on 3 surrounding peaks. These Korean castles were the prototypes for further Japanese castle developments. In the orange circle you can see still the moat and wall remains, broken only today by an expressway. At Hakata Port on the coast, a guest house accommodated foreign ambassadors, travelling monks and merchants. Archaeological remains have recently been uncovered within the Fukuoka castle grounds, and a reconstruction is now open to visitors. Back in Nara, Todaiji Temple, founded in 728 CE, was built to house the great Daibutsu Buddha, sculpted by a Korean sculptor known as Kimimaro, with construction and metallurgical techniques imported from Korea. Copper mined at the Naganobori mines in Yamaguchi provides evidence of Korean mining methods and miners who lived at Naganobori, and the copper was transported by ship through the inland sea and then up a river system to Nara. In 2006, NHK, the national broadcaster, recreated the casting, albeit in 1:30 scale. When Korean craftsmen built the real Buddha in the 8th century, they began with strong foundations and scaffolding, shaping a rough Buddha form in clay around that scaffolding. The statue was then cast in 5 sections, and the furnace was raised onto each of the new earthen platforms. The hands and head were likely founded or made separately. When the final section was complete, the mould was removed, the bronze then had to be polished, and details like the hair and flanking figures added. Lotus petals, gold leaf, and consecration followed in 752, with casting continuing for years and gold work for even longer. We see very little of the gold left on our Buddha today. Todaiji Temple's Shoso-in treasure house preserves miraculous Silk Road objects, including a rare 5-string lute illustrating the global cultural exchange of the era. Camels were used by the Uyghur to trade wool and honey with Japan through northern Korean ports. Each year in autumn, a select group of about 70 objects from the Shoso-in is displayed at the Nara National Museum. This exhibition is not to be missed. In the 2025 annual airing of Shoso-in treasures, the brush that was used to open the eyes of the great Buddha when he was consecrated on the 9th of April 752 will be displayed. During the Nara period, Japan sent 19 diplomatic missions to miraculous Tang, China, but many of these missions hugged the Korean coastline, interacting with the Koreans. Trade flourished, with Japan supplying gold and mercury. China provided porcelain, perfume, and literature. Scribes from the Korean state of Bakje, who wrote Chinese and had introduced writing to Japan in the early 5th century, continued to provide interpreting and translation skills for the Japanese. Korea also continued to provide metal, and Sheila provided sophisticated shipbuilding technologies. Nara's Buddhist temples, as large as you saw them, eventually became a little too powerful for the liking of the emperor and his regents, prompting the move of the capital to Kyoto in 794. This begins the Heian period, 794 to 1192 CE. Kyoto was modelled after Tang dynasty capitals, Xi'an and Luoyang, and their grid streetscapes. The location boasted excellent feng shui, with mountains on three sides and open to a body of water in the south. An excellent water supply with three rivers supplying the city. This is the Kamo River that you see here. But most importantly, an existing large population of Hata clan Korean weavers, who I mentioned previously. And of course, this weaving tradition continues in Kyoto today. Late Heian period, this is late 12th century, aristocrats in Japan sent private trading vessels to Song China to trade in precious objects. They traded in ceramics such as this magnificent Korean celadon, a wonderful example held by the National Museum in Seoul. The excellence of celadons was widely known in Japan and China. In Korea, they were crafted as everyday objects. The Chinese admired them as the best of their kind under heaven. This incense container has an open work lid to allow the smoke to flow, a lotus-covered body where the incense was burned, and a round base which rests on three tiny rabbits. Its design wishes for good luck, long life, and with rabbits, of course, many, many offspring. Toward the Heian period's end, warrior families protecting feuding branches of the imperial family rose to power, and eventually the warrior family, the Minamoto, wrested government control from the aristocracy and moved the seat and established a military government to Kamakura, establishing the Kamakura shogunate 1185 to 1333 CE. Kamakura is a beautiful, small, austere city about 1 hour's train journey south of Tokyo. This move of government control in Japan coincided with the Mongol conquest of China. Genghis Khan invaded China in 1211 and established the Yuan dynasty in 1279, the first time China was ruled by non-Han peoples. In the destruction of magnificent Song China, Zen Buddhists were persecuted in China, and the fleeing priests found a welcoming home in Japan, aligning with the austere warrior ethos of the Kamakura shogunate and influencing garden design, temple practices, and art, including Song-inspired landscape paintings. Zen is a discipline in enlightenment. Enlightenment is emancipation, freedom in inner life, self-power or self-realization. This rang true for the warrior philosophy of life, and in Japan, meditation was seen as the key to achieving enlightenment. A key meditation practice for Zen monks is the cleaning of the temple. And the care of the garden is a meditation practice in of itself. These new gardens found in the narrow courtyards of Zen temples and warrior homes in Kyoto and Kamakura were attempts by the Japanese to create three-dimensional versions of the beautiful two-dimensional ink paintings of the Song dynasty of China that they so revered. This is the kind of painting the Japanese admired from Song China, and the inspiration from which they sculpted these three-dimensional Zen gardens. This example is not Song; it's from much later, from 1699. but it is in the Art Gallery of New South Wales, Sydney collection, and resembles a song work with a sacred mountain in the background. The Japanese imagine this as sacred Mount Horai, otherwise known as Mount Penglai in Sanskrit. In India, space is left for the mind to wander and fill in the middle, while at the bottom, tiny travellers and other small details, little old highways, remind us of our tiny, small nature and role in the universe. After establishing the Yuan dynasty in China, the Mongols set their sights on Korea. The Koreans bravely fought off the Mongols, begging Japan for assistance, which was not provided. After a brave 28 years of resisting, Korea finally succumbed to the Mongols. This made Goryeo Korea one of the few states to resist swift Mongol domination. This brave stance against the Mongols is one reason given for Japan being able to fight off two subsequent invasion waves of Mongols in the late 13th century. Weather was on the side of the Japanese too, with the Mongol fleet sunk in a typhoon in the second invasion. But we should not underestimate the hard work of the Koreans in weakening the Mongols before their invasion of Japan. Japan was saved, but there were no spoils of war to reward the great feudal lords of Japan who had assisted, and so they rose up against the Kamakura government. One family, the Ashikaga, was successful and returned power briefly to the emperor in 1333, but then seized control for their family. And this began the Muromachi period, named after the street in which the Ashikaga built their palace in Kyoto. The Muromachi shogunate lasted 15 generations. The first and third shoguns were very strong, if not ruthless, leaders. The third, Yoshimitsu, built the Golden Pavilion in Kyoto, which I'm sure many of you have visited. But it was his grandson, the eighth shogun, Yoshimasa, who left the deepest cultural mark. A poor ruler, but great patron of the arts, Yoshimasa's succession dispute triggered the Warring States period. This period starts with Kyoto burning to the ground in the mid-15th century. Kyoto would take another 150 years to recover fully, as depicted in brilliant screens I will introduce momentarily. Retired to his silver pavilion, Shogun Yoshimasa watched the country tear itself apart. However, under his patronage, three enduring art forms flourished, despite or precisely because the country was tearing itself apart. A Renaissance-type moment. The tea ceremony, Noh theatre, and linked verse poetry, which centuries later would evolve into haiku. The tea ceremony offered a quiet moment of fellowship in a violent age. My own professor in Tokyo, Donald Keane, the great translator of Japanese literature, noted that Yoshimasa was the only shogun to leave a true heritage for the whole people. Noh theatre, with its otherworldly costumes, movement and music, provided escape from mundane troubles. The Muromachi era also saw constant troubles created by wako, or Japanese pirates. To Korea's credit, diplomacy was used, but eventually Korea struck at piracy directly, even invading Tsushima in the early 1400s. In 1443, Tsushima's feudal lord So Sadamori signed a treaty with Korea, opening an era of active trade. Korean goods flowed in, including the most famous tea bowl in Japan, and Lord Saw went to great lengths to control his own country's pirates, Japanese pirates. The most famous tea bowl in Japan is the Kizaemon Ido tea bowl. Simple, flawed, and revered as a national treasure. Now, just to remind you, the domain of Tsushima stood equidistant between Japan and Korea. It's quite a large island. During the later Edo period, all trade with Korea was conducted through Tsushima. Yanagi Soetsu, founder of Japan's folk craft movement, described the Kizaemon Ido tea bowl as the finest in the world, beautiful precisely because of its humble origins. He states, "This single tea bowl is considered to be the finest in the world. When I saw it, my heart fell. So simple, no more ordinary thing could be imagined. The clay had been dug from the hill at the back of the house. The clay was made with the ash from the hearth. The potter's wheel had been irregular. The shape revealed no particular thought. It was one of many. The work had been fast. The turning was rough, done with dirty hands. The throwing slipshod. The glaze had run over the foot. The kiln was a wretched affair, the firing careless. Sand had stuck to the pot. Made for a purpose, made to do work, sold to be used in everyday life." The Japanese saw great beauty in these ceramics, and a thirst for Korean ceramics is a factor leading us to the Pottery Wars. Muromachi ended after a century of conflict, resolved by three great unifiers. The era of the first two leaders, 1574 to 1600, is called Azuchi Momoyama, named after the castles of Oda Nobunaga at Azuchi and Toyotomi Hideyoshi at Momoyama. Kyoto, in the aftermath of its destruction in the Warring States period, lacked strong leadership from any of the classes and only began to rebuild as the merchant class rose in wealth and status towards the end of the Muromachi period. The recovery of Kyoto and the nation's cultural heart was recorded in important screens known as Rakuchu Rakugaizu. The Art Gallery of New South Wales owns a particularly rare and interesting example, kindly donated by Kenneth and Yasuko Maya after they saw it in Kyoto in 1970, exhibited at the National Museum of Kyoto. This is the screen that I will describe in great detail on a YouTube coming soon. Goryeo Buddhist painting from Korea was one influence on this style of painting used in the screens of Kyoto. Alongside Chinese painting traditions, which influenced the major Kano school of painting, Goryeo Korean Buddhist paintings had a strong presence in Japan, preserved in Japanese temple collections. Goryeo Buddhist paintings, characterized by their delicate details and rich mineral pigments, contributed to the broader Buddhist artistic tradition that informed Japanese artists, including those who would later contribute to the Kano style. Following Hideyoshi's unification of Japan and the cessation of a century of civil war, Hideyoshi turned his sights on conquering China. To get there, he first invaded Korea twice in 1592 and 1597 from a new base at Hizen Nagoya Castle near Karatsu in Kyushu. The first invasion involved 150,000 troops. Hideyoshi used the tea ceremony to display his power. He famously built a golden tea room in Osaka Castle, but there was also one at Hizen Nagoya Castle. I've actually made tea in the golden tea room at the Moa Museum in Atami. You might consider it gaudy, but in fact it was a very beautiful experience, especially at night, with every surface and utensil shimmering in the gold. Hideyoshi's first invasion swept aside Korea's poorly maintained coastal defences, and Hideyoshi's men built 35 castles, many still preserved well by Korea. Japan was soon pushed back by Admiral Yi Sun-sin's navy, civilian militias, and Ming Chinese forces. A truce in 1596 gave Hideyoshi time to regroup, and he launched his second campaign in 1597. It was only after Hideyoshi's death in 1598 that Japan withdrew, ending 7 years of devastation. Admiral Yi remains Korea's national hero, his statue and turtle ship dominating the main avenue of central Seoul. As Japan retreated, thousands of artisans and scholars were seized and brought to Japan. They included potters who established Japan's great kilns, tradesmen, and Neo-Confucian philosophers. One potter was Sim Dangjil, forefather of the Simsu Kwan family, who founded the major Satsuma kiln in southern Kyushu, Chinjukan. The kiln created the Hibakari Tibo, my favorite. Hibakari means fire only. In other words, its materials and skills were all Korean, only the fire was Japanese. Many Confucian philosophers were brought to Japan, including Kang Hung, who stayed 3 years in Edo. In that short time, he taught Fujiwara Seika, known as the father of Japanese Neo-Confucianism. Seika, in turn, taught Hayashi Razan, who became the Tokugawa shogunate's chief Confucian advisor. Another pottery family brought to Japan were the Nakazato of Karatsu, now in their 15th generation. Their Ryutagama kiln, which is actually a branch of the main Nakazato family, is today run by Takashi Santaki and grandson Kenta. The kiln is supported by the Yoyo Kaku Inn in Karatsu. I consider Yoyo Kaku Inn to be one of Japan's finest inns. The inn honors Korea remembering that the name Karatsu, the city in which it's located, means Japan's gateway or port to the continent and was a trading hub with China and Korea. Its owner, Den-san, Okochi Den-san, speaks Korean perfectly, has visited Korea 80 times, and treats guests from Korea with great honor. 3 rooms at Yoyo Kakuin are dedicated to Nakazato pottery and the 3 generations. And Yutagama kiln works are, of course, used, serving all the magnificent dishes at meal times, and are used for flower decorations in the sublime rooms. Everything about this inn reflects Den-san's exquisite taste. After Hideyoshi's death, his generals clashed. The decisive Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 set Eastern Japan against Western Japan, a cultural divide still felt today. The feudal lord Tokugawa Ieyasu of the East won and moved the government to Edo, beginning the long, peaceful Edo period, 1603 to 1868. Ieyasu, the first shogun, required all of his 250 feudal lords to travel to Edo on alternate years. Korean or Joseon diplomatic missions also came. At first they negotiated the return of prisoners of war from the Pottery Wars, but later they became goodwill embassies, marking each new shogun's accession. And Japan returned the favour, visiting Korea as well. These Tongsinsa diplomatic missions embodied over 250 years of peace and good faith between Korea and Japan, rare in world history. Japan opened a trading office in Busan, managed by the So family, of course, of Tsushima, and around 500 Japanese lived in Busan, exchanging silver and copper for Korean ginseng and Chinese silk. There was a huge craze in Japan for simple Korean paintings painted during the Tongsinsa diplomatic missions. Painter Kim Yu-song, who travelled with the Tongsinsa mission in the 1760s, sold graceful works to the eager Japanese. A number of these works are now in the Busan History Museum. His paintings, often of orchids and butterflies, were snapped up in Japan. They conveyed peace and beauty and were easily painted on the road. Meanwhile, in Edo itself, Edo was flooded with dazzling woodblock prints, actors, courtesans, and erotic shunga. One erotic print or shunga by Utamaro shows a couple locked in tender embrace, her scarlet underkimono flashing against pale skin. The fan he holds is covered in cheeky puns using the shellfish clam. Compared to the formal art of the Koreans, Edo's prints were playful, erotic, and wildly popular. Now, this is actually the first shunga, or erotic ukiyo-e, ever displayed at the Tokyo National Museum. The lovers gently touch each other's face and neck, and the man's eye can just be seen gazing at the woman as they kiss. The pervasiveness of shunga in daily life caused shock to a visiting Korean emissary, Singyu Hwan, who spent 9 months in Japan in 1719 on the eve of the Edo government's Kyoho reforms that would officially outlaw erotic publications, although of course they persisted. Sin recorded in his diary, Heiyu Rok, records of travels overseas, that individuals often carried shunga in their kimono sleeves, used aphrodisiacs, kept the light on at night while making love, and used shunga books to experiment with sexual positions. His view was that Japan, although notionally Confucian, was in fact robustly open about sex and sexuality, in stark contrast to his Korean homeland. The super flat nature of the picture planes of these Japanese woodblock prints, and indeed some of their erotic nature, is reflected in the artwork of Murakami Takashi, an erotic super flat artwork from 1998 titled My Lonesome Cowboy by Murakami, sold at Sotheby's in New York for US $15.1 million in 2008, which was a record at the time for the artist. The Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney has an excellent example of this super flat work by Murakami, which was the centerpiece of the Japan Supernatural show in 2019. Next, we consider factors which led to World War II. In 1852, Commodore Matthew Perry arrived at the entrance to Edo Bay and demanded that Japan open to trade with the United States. This started the Bakumatsu period of Japan, 1852 to 1868. Bakumatsu means end of the shogunate period. The Bakumatsu period marked the end of isolation. It saw an ideological divide between pro-imperial nationalists, Isshin Shishi, and shogunate forces, or Shinsengumi. Both forces agreed Japan had to strengthen itself, but while the imperialists first wanted minimal contact with foreigners, they soon accepted Japan's urgent need for Western technology and advice to avoid China's fate in the Opium Wars. The 15th Tokugawa shogun, Yoshinobu, resigned in 1867 and returned power to the emperor, beginning the Meiji era, 1868 to 1912. After 2.5 centuries, Japan's policy of seclusion ended and the country opened to strong Western learnings and technology. From 1868 until the 1931 Mukden incident, a false flag staged to justify Japan's invasion of Manchuria, Japan modernized its army and navy with help from France, Britain, and later Germany. German advisor Major Jacob Meckel warned that Korea was a dagger pointed at the heart of Japan, strategically vital because of its location and inability to defend itself. Disastrous advice. Korea became a pawn between Japan, China, and Russia. A French cartoon even showed the three nations fishing in a pond labelled Korea. The First Sino-Japanese War, 1894-95, was fought over influence in Korea. Japanese woodblock print artists poured out propaganda prints. Kiyochika is considered to be the last significant example of ukiyo-e prints. His work documented rapid modernization and westernization in Japan, and he employs a sense of light and shade called kosenga, inspired by Western art techniques. The war ended with the Treaty of Shimonoseki. China recognized Korea's independence and ceded Taiwan to Japan. Japan fought again over Korea in 1904. The Russo-Japanese War, 1904-05, is sometimes called World War I. It arose from Russia's hunger for a warm water port. Japan struck first with a surprise attack on Port Arthur in February 1904, a very successful surprise attack, which was an unfortunate learning for later attacks on Manila, Singapore, and Hawaii. By the year's end, Admiral Togo had destroyed Russia's Pacific Fleet. Russia's Baltic fleet then sailed east, only to be annihilated at Tsushima in May 1905. Russia lost 8 battleships and sued for peace. The resulting Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by US President Theodore Roosevelt, gave Japan control of Korea, South Manchuria, Port Arthur, its railway, and southern Sakhalin. Busan became a Japanese base for exploitation of Korean resources, and in 1908 the Japanese Oriental Development Company was established and based in this central Busan building. After the war, for 50 years the building was used as the US Consulate and Information Service. Today it houses the Busan Modern History Museum and reflects on an age of occupation and exploitation. When I first visited Busan years ago, the exhibition described fairly, I thought, the development of Busan through the Japanese colonization period and US presence. Today it houses a beautiful library for the citizens of Busan. And the story about Japanese occupation has moved across the road to the old Busan headquarters of the Bank of Korea. In the basement are huge vaults, which were always secretive, and these spaces have been given over to young artists who explore the history of Busan, reflecting on the weight of the building's history and expressing wisdom perceived from ancient maps, documentary paintings, and artifacts in the museum. Kim Yu-kyung reflects on the spiritual desolation of a Busan park turned into an Air Force base and named after a race track in Florida. Yoon-suk Yoo explores the space taken away by foreign powers. The baseballs are American, the shuttlecocks Korean, in this game of chess and maneuvering for control of land space in Busan and more broadly Korea. Park Ji-won explores the old lifestyles of Busan, Lost. Of course, all the characters are cats. She uses the old Goryeo Buddhist painting method to beautifully colour her works, which was such an influence on Japan. The Taisho period is 1912 to 1926. Was brief but significant. Japan rose on the world stage. While liberal ideas grew at home in Japan, we saw the first real shoots of democracy. Unfortunately, under the Meiji Constitution, the military reported directly to the emperor, not through the cabinet, which was an immense flaw that was a major factor leading us to the Pacific War. In 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake devastated Tokyo and Yokohama, killing 100,000. Sympathy was brief. Japan's activities in Taiwan and Korea, and tensions between Japanese and Koreans in Tokyo in the aftermath of the earthquake soon reignited suspicion. The long Showa era began in 1926 with Emperor Hirohito. It spanned 63 years and can be divided into 3 distinct periods. First, the interwar era of capitalism, then the horrors of war in China and the Pacific in the middle, and finally, rapid post-war growth. In the 1930s, we did see cross-cultural exchange. Korean artist Choi Yong-lim, born in Japanese-occupied Pyongyang, studied wood prints under Ono Tadaakira, who was a very good curator based in Korea during the occupation period. So there were positives from that devastating period. Choi then moved to Japan in 1938 to study further under Ono's great friend Munakata Shuko, the Sosaku Hanga artist. When the Korean War broke out, Choi fled south, leaving family behind, and his sorrow and memories of his home in the north of Korea echo in his works. And warm correspondence survives between Choi and Munakata. Munakata's aerograms to Choi are on the right, and the replies from Choi on the left there. Meanwhile, Japan's imperial ambitions hardened. A staged incident in Manchuria in 1931 led to invasion and the puppet state of Manchu Kuo, with the deposed Qing emperor as figurehead. By 1937, war with China was in full swing. Japan's successes provoked Western oil embargoes, and facing collapse, Japan struck Manila, Singapore, and Pearl Harbor, a fatal miscalculation. The Pacific War ended in August 1945 with the atomic bombings. Hiroshima on the 6th of August, Nagasaki on the 9th of August, and then the USSR's declaration of war on Japan, and the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, and the illegal occupation of the Kuril Islands by Russia, seized after surrender, and the reason that no peace treaty exists between Russia and Japan. Some 600,000 Koreans stayed in Japan after the war. They became known as Zainichi Koreans. Among them, artist Kim Song-ran embraced the traditional Korean style, choseonhwa, using washi paper, blending heritage with reflections on life in Japan. Her teaching Zainichi young students in Japan encouraged young Koreans to value their identity while engaging with Japanese society. Japan's post-war boom of the 1970s and 80s ended with the Plaza Accord of 1984, and the Heisei era, 1989 to 2019, began with the death of Emperor Hirohito. The Plaza Accord forcibly revalued the yen and set the stage for 3 lost decades of sluggish economic growth and deflation in Japan. It did nothing to dissuade Americans from buying Japanese-made automobiles. The Heisei era also endured disasters, the Kobe earthquake in 1995, and in 2011 the Tohoku earthquake, tsunami and nuclear crisis. Emperor Akihito's calm presence during Tohoku cemented his role as a true national symbol. Japanese and Korean artists responded in many layered and heartfelt ways to the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. Their responses range from direct relief efforts and charity projects to artistic expressions that grappled with grief, memory, resilience, and solidarity. Today, we live in the Reiwa era under Emperor Naruhito. Japan and Korea now share deep challenges, rapid aging, shrinking populations, and rising political extremes. Japan's population has fallen from 128 million in 2010 to under 122 million today. Korea faces an even sharper decline. Immigration, once resisted, is increasingly necessary, resulting in far-right political movements questioning immigration and over-tourism. Despite these lingering concerns, the post-war era has seen important artistic exchanges between Japan and Korea. In the devastation following World War II, we witnessed a remarkable example of cultural exchange between Korea and Japan. A young man, just 20, arrived in Japan and became a great philosopher and artist. His name is Li Yufan, born in 1936. Li Yufan moved to Japan in 1956 and completed a philosophy degree at Nihon University. His essay, Beyond Being and Nothingness, a thesis on Sekine Nobuo, 1970, is regarded as a key foundation of the post-war Japanese art movement Monoha, School of Things, of the late 1960s and early 70s. The essay explained why Sekine Nobuo's earthwork, phase Mother Earth, was groundbreaking. Instead of art as an expression of feelings or ideas, Lee argued Sekine showed art could be about the encounter between materials, space, and the viewer. By digging a hole and forming a matching cylinder of earth, Sekine revealed presence and absence at once, distributing notions of being and nothingness. For Lee, the power lay in how people directly experience matter, place, and perception. Rather than searching for hidden meanings, materials, he believed, should not be controlled, but treated as active presences. Art becomes an event of awareness and discovery. Today, Sekine's work is owned by the Rotowski family in Dallas, who own one of the most important private collections of Gutai and Monoha Japanese art. Liu Fan's vision endures in the museums dedicated to him, Space Liu Fan in Busan, opened in 2015, and the original Liu Fan Museum on Naoshima, Japan. The museum in Japan predated Lee's spaces in Busan by 5 years. Another example of Japan-Korea dialogue is Hiroshima-based Yanagi Yukinori. Many of you will know him from the 21st Biennale of Sydney and his Icarus container seen here. He is also the curator of the major installation on Inujima Island in the Inland Sea, and of his own art island, Momoshima, which I'm sure some of you have visited. Yanagi studied Nihonga painting at Tokyo University of the Arts, but was discouraged from interdisciplinary work. Only after moving to the US for an MFA in sculpture at Yale, 1988 to 1990, did he gain the freedom to critique Japan with fresh eyes. Taught by Vito Acconci and Frank Gehry, and studying alongside Matthew Barney, he developed an interdisciplinary approach linking art, architecture, and performance. In 1990, he began his World Flag Ant Farm, inspired by tracing a single ant's path at Yale. His famous ant farm projects involve ants burrowing through sand-filled boxes shaped like national flags and currencies. Through the oblivion of the ants to man-made borders, Yanagi critiques nationalism. The ants dissolve geopolitical boundaries. This questioning continued in his politically charged ground transposition exhibited at Blumenpo in Los Angeles. One sphere is covered in soil from Okinawa, long a US military base, the other from Manzanar, the World War II internment camp for Japanese Americans. This work echoes the Gutai movement of the 1950s in Osaka, art as action and liberation. While Gutai focused on what artists did with materials, Liu Fan's Monoha asked what happens when you let materials simply be. Ground transportation is also owned by Cindy and Howard Rotowski, an incredible collection. Yanagi also drew inspiration from the oldest surviving Korean world map, made in 1402 and held in Japan, considered one of the finest maps of its era, to design a purpose-built museum for his art in Korea. A very early drawing he made called Square Dance from 1985 was also used as his inspiration for the design of this extraordinary floating museum in southwest Korea. The museum is now complete. The galleries house Yanagi's works, including one based on that ancient map and another version of ground transposition using interesting politically charged soils. You'll have to visit to find out what they are. The museum is the first in an area in Korea near Mokpo, comprising hundreds of small islands similar to the art islands of the inland sea of Japan. Thank you.